I decided to do something that I considered very close and near and dear to my heart: ethics and malaria. And the reason I kind of picked malaria is because I contracted malaria when I was a kid in Senegal, West Africa. I'm born in the U.S., but as a child, I went to West Africa with my dad to go to school, and I contracted malaria. It was one of the most interesting and painful things that ever happened to me. I'm glad I recovered from it. I was fortunate. I know a lot of people that were in my school that weren't as fortunate, so I decided this is something I wanted to talk about. Some of the important information: obviously, malaria causes more harm to humans than any other parasitic disease. Many people don't know that, especially because it's in a lot of the poorer nations. It's becoming an endemic problem that finally starting to get its just due. If you was to compare it to how quickly COVID-19 or the SARS came out, and there was a lot of funds put towards ensuring that we keep loss of life down to a minimum, obviously because a virus spreads a lot more rapidly than a plasmodium does. Malaria disproportionately affects low-income populations. There's a debate back and forth with regards to why that's the case. A lot of times it's not on the priority, and it's not in these areas. For people that live in America, Western Europe, different parts of Asia where this is not a problem, you don't see that in the forefront. But there are people on the front lines that understand scientifically that this is something that has to be dealt with because it can become a major problem in the future. So they have put efforts to control and eliminate malaria, but there's a little bit of analysis. So the studies that I looked at went on to compare a lot of the different statistics and the methodologies of how they plan on attacking this problem. Because there's an estimated 300 million cases annually, and malaria research in Africa has been ongoing for over a century. If you know a little thing about history, the French army actually were affected. This is in the 1400s when they were fighting against the Haitian revolt, and a lot of the soldiers were suffering from malaria, which was also part and parcel, part of the reason why they were essentially beaten by the Haitian army under the Toussaint overture at the time. And unfortunately, it's the over-reliance on anti-malarial drugs that has led to successive resistance and loss of the first-line drugs. So that's part of the reason why scientists will start looking at a different approach, because we don't want to become dependent on just oral medications to try to prevent the proliferation of this devastating disease. So the two case studies that I decided to look at, I looked at a few, but these were the two that kind of stuck out to me. First one being health research ethics in malaria, vector trials in Africa. I wanted to have a better understanding of how and why uh, they used the methodologies that they did, which I will cover in a future slide. And the second one is the ethical aspects of malaria control and research on the malaria year. So that being said, the methods that's currently used, and I'll start with what they've been using. Um, they kind of, in a roundabout way, figured out that quinine was very effective in treating malaria. They noticed that when they gave soldiers who were on missions as legionnaires in Africa water with quinine, obviously they didn't want to drink the water because of the microphone, but they had no idea that it would have such a positive effect on some of the soldiers and be a deterrent. This plasmodium isn't really like that, and it has an ill effect on it. So it led the way to a lot of different research. Chloroquine became one of the most widely used treatments for malaria prevention, among other different drugs. Another physical intervention that has been implemented is insecticide treated nets. Funny enough, there have been many people, and myself included, who have used these nets, but for whatever reason, you still wake up with mosquito bites all over you. It's an anomaly to this day. I don't understand. So as to the method I mentioned, two slides previously, there's a very controversial method that's being used. This human landing catches. Obviously, scientists, to really understand and get a better idea of how uh, the mosquito not only affects humans, but how once it's transferred its, once it has its blood meal, it transferred the plasmodium into the bloodstream of the volunteer. How the onset of sickness takes place. Now, yes, it gives valuable information on the one hand, but unfortunately, malaria may not be the only thing that is transferred to a research assistant or a research volunteer. And that's why it caught so much heat, and there's still a lot of debate and discussion about what is the best opportune way to really and truly understand how it affects the human body. Another methodology that's being considered and in some areas starting to be used is the release of genetically modified mosquitoes, and essentially there will be male mosquitoes who would mate with the female, and no fertilization would take place, i.e., if she's not fertilized, then she doesn't have a hunger for nitrogen, and she wouldn't prey on mammalian blood to ensure that she has the right amount of nutrients, so that the larvae can grow once they're ready. So mosquito control is again the biggest thing. Obviously, it's a vector for many different sicknesses. So when you control the mosquito, you can control the problems. Wealthier, more developed regions have better control measures, and a robust health support system always plays a major role in that. I mean, if you have good control and you have a good health support system like you do in the U.S. and even some places a little better in different parts of Europe and to some extent even Cuba, then you have an ability to really make a dent in the amount of cases that are happening and try to minimize it to the point where we don't see it in these areas anymore. So with the malaria statistics, when you look at them, they're alarming, right? If you look at HPV, HIV, and other different viral-related illnesses, the amount of people that die, in a short amount of time, we've got great control over HIV. Obviously, the mechanisms of infection are a lot different, but it's to the point now where people can be undetected. Obviously, a lot of years of research went into that, but the thinking process is that if the same amount of energy is put into it, it will get to a point where malaria will be just like AIDS and HPV and other ailments, where it doesn't really affect your quality of life as much, and you'll see a drastic decrease in the amount of people that are affected every year. Maybe it goes from 300 to 100. I mean, that's a great number. A million deaths can, even if it's cut in half. Loss of life is never a great thing, but again, that's wonderful. And children disproportionately are affected by it in poor regions of the world. So the case study conclusion is the eradication of malaria obviously was the main message that I saw in both of my research readings. Because when you control the vector, then you control what it would infect its, unsuspecting meal with. Essentially, if you eradicate the malaria mosquito, then these organisms that would naturally affect us, they can't use that vector against us. Maybe something else might take its place. We don't know. Ecosystems can be very fickle, but specifically, mosquito has been linked to, SARS, West Nile virus, and other sicknesses. So taking out the mosquito may have a dual or triple effect, where you start to see different numbers start to decrease with other, chronic illnesses as well. Relevance and future direction. Climate change, believe it or not, is here. And there are areas of the world where it used to be maybe a sub-Saharan area. I remember going to Africa, and there was a park that I visited, and 10 years prior, it was like sub-Saharan, kind of humid, different proliferation of different ecological species of plants, fruits, etc. I revisited recently, and I was flabbergasted to discover that it had become arid. It seemed like the Saharan desert started to migrate down, but it was just essentially climate change. With a change in environment, ergo, the species associated with that environment move to areas where they can survive. So this is the fear that it may go into a point where it might start to affect some of the wealthier nations like America and Western Europe. And literature review, again, was highlighting the socio-economic elements of malaria. The process of catching mosquitoes for research often includes using poor communities. And the personal analysis for me, again, it affected my life in such a drastic way, and I wanted to make sure that I talked about it your interest, because this is something that I plan to in the future try to discover what exactly was it that was given to me that allowed me to recover so quickly, because the medication that they gave me was not working. Um, it got to a point where a lot of people were dying, and just figured I'd be one of those kids that was going to die as well. Thank goodness there was a chemist in the area who studied pharmacology. He was West African medicine doctor, and he took us into the forest and he found this herb. I don't know what it was to this day. I was a really young kid at the time, and I was very weak, and I'll never forget it. I thought that's the day I'm gonna die. But he gave special instructions to the cook how to prepare the tea, like the broth. And when I drank this broth, it was like 50% of my energy came back. Amazing. It touched me to this day, and that's why I want to share this with you. Thank you